Here's a real-life example of how people automatically try to cure licence with legalism. To set the scene here, it is just after the economic collapse of 2008, and Boris Johnson, who at that time was the Mayor of London, is being interviewed by Jeremy Paxman for the BBC's Newsnight programme. Paxman starts talking about how people are becoming resentful towards the greed of the super rich, especially the bankers who caused the crisis in the first place.
People are very, very conscious and increasingly conscious of the number of people, whether they're Russian oligarchs, fleeing African despots, Arabian sheikhs or anyone else, who are walking the streets of this city and against whom they begin, frankly, to feel rather resentful.
You're talking about a sort of resentment of the super rich.
Yes. Yes.
And again, I understand that. I think people do feel alienated and they feel very hostile and suspicious. What I want to do, I don't want to harm the wealth generating, the tax generating potential of this city. But I do want to see these people that you describe showing much more commitment.
What do they do for us?
Well, I think what they could do is give a lot more. This city
Why don't we just tax them more?
Well, this city is built on the very largely in the 19th century on the euergetism, the generosity, the philanthropy of dynamic people who made colossal sums of money. And they built schools, and they went out and they founded hospitals and orphanages. And what makes me...
They're not doing it now.
They're not doing it now.
And they should, shouldn't they?
They should do it now. And it's quite incredible to me that people can walk away with multi-million-pound bonuses and not understand that what people want to see is them doing what the great titans did in the Victorian era.
If they refuse to do it, is it not the obligation of the state to take sufficient money from them by force of law to ensure that it is done?
That is the obvious answer.
Yes.
The trouble with that answer is that you end up with a tax burden that is, frankly, a deterrent to investment and to enterprise in London. So that's you're right to put it that way, but that is the dilemma.
Why did the morality of capitalism change in that way? What happened to benevolent capitalism?
I think people got into a kind of mindset which I think is quite wrong. They started to, because tax advanced and people felt that they were paying more and more of their incomes in taxation, they somehow thought that they'd made their contribution, and they somehow started to think that their obligations were over. And they failed to see that a huge gap is opening up between the super rich and the rest of society, frankly. And I think that they need to understand that. You can do...
That gap's really dangerous, potentially, isn't it?
It's not healthy. There are huge numbers of people in this city who are making an awful lot of money. We want them here, we want them to make money, we want them to generate jobs and growth for the rest of society. But they've got to understand that they're lucky to be here, I would say. It's a fantastic city to live in, and that they could make a much, much bigger contribution.
You can see what happened in that exchange. Jeremy Paxman says that there are all these super rich people out there selfishly holding on to their money. They're being too greedy. They're not using their freedom to benefit others. The mayor agrees with him, but remembers that there was once a time in the 19th century when rich people were much more generous. They freely donated their money to build schools, hospitals, orphanages, and such like. He wishes that they were doing that today, but they're not, and both agree in that point.
They're not doing
it now.
And then Paxman says that if they're not doing it freely, they should be forced to do it by legalism, i.e. by raising taxes. If they won't hand over the money freely, the government should just take the money by force of law. At this point, the mayor says that if they did that, then all the rich people would just beat the system by leaving the country to do their business elsewhere. You can't make men good by law. They just find loopholes and ways around the laws. In the 18th century, the governments of England, Scotland and France decided they were going to introduce a new tax on big houses. They measured the size of the house by how many windows it had. More windows, more tax. And so began the infamous window tax. Now, did the people with lots of windows in their house pay the tax? No, of course not. They just found ways around the law. In fact, they started bricking up all of their windows. So widespread was this method of beating the system that the citizens actually started developing health problems from the lack of sunlight reaching them in their windowless boxes. In the Netherlands, they tried a similar idea on large houses, but instead of the windows, the tax was based on the width of the buildings. Did the people then simply pay more tax? Of course not. They simply built their houses extra narrow and extra tall so they'd have the same floor space without having to pay excessive charges. Again, the government tried to use law to coerce and restrict the people, and the people just found ways around the laws. So apart from anything else, legalism just isn't very effective. And when they realise this, Boris and Paxman start scratching their heads at this conundrum and wonder aloud why the morality and benevolence of the city folk has taken such a nosedive since Victorian times. Why are they so selfish now? Where has the charity and generosity gone? Why aren't they building hospitals and schools and orphanages anymore?
Why did the morality of capitalism change in that way? What happened to benevolent capitalism?
The mayor shakes his head and stares out the window, looking for an answer. And so, do you see the pattern here? Society bounces back and forth between license and legalism, and they're forgetting all the while that there is another way. And so with some help from the great minds of the past, let's help Boris and Jeremy out here. The reason why people are becoming less generous and benevolent is because our society is increasingly rejecting Jesus and the sinful nature is taking over. It's no coincidence that as societies become less faithful, selfishness has increased. Edmund Burke says, men qualify for freedom in exact proportion to their disposition to put moral chains on their own appetites. Society cannot exist unless a controlling power is put somewhere on the will and appetite, and the less of it there is within, the more there must be without. It is ordained in the eternal constitution of things that men of intemperate minds cannot be free. Their passions forge their fetters. So, if the Holy Spirit isn't restraining the sinful nature from within, the government starts trying to restrain it from without, by laws, by legalism. Edmund Burke went on to say, true religion is the foundation of society. When that is once shaken by contempt, the whole fabric cannot be stable or lasting. Spanish philosopher, statesman and writer Juan Donoso Cortés said, there are only two possible forms of control, one internal and the other external, religious control and political control. They are of such a nature that when the internal religious barometer rises, the external political barometer falls, and likewise when the internal religious barometer falls, the external political barometer, that is political control and tyranny, rises. That is the law of humanity, a law of history. If civilized man falls into disbelief and immorality, the way is prepared for some gigantic and colossal tyrant, universal and immense. Listen to Benjamin Franklin when he said, only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. As nations become more corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters. The Roman historian Tacitus said, the more corrupt the state, the more numerous the laws. Benjamin Rush said, without virtue there can be no liberty. Democracy can only exist as long as the majority of people do the right thing when no one is looking. Listen to Henry Drummond when he says, willpower does not change men, time does not change men, Christ changes men. And listen to Horace Greeley who said, it is impossible to enslave mentally or socially a Bible-reading people. The principles of the Bible are the groundwork of human freedom. Even people with no Christian leanings can vaguely see this truth. James May said, a surgeon once told me surgery is a sign of failure because it's a last resort, which I think is a very healthy view. I think we should be trying to encourage society to heal itself, and I don't think you do that with rules. There's an ever-increasing burden of paperwork and administration and computer passwords and tax codes already on people's shoulders, and I'm not sure how much more we can bear. We're going to be like Rome, completely submerged in bureaucracy and unable to do anything else because there won't be the time or the energy. So I think yes, fewer rules is something to aim for. My personal views are that I like the idea of a society that tries to reduce rules, reduces interference, and encourages individual open-mindedness and freedom of thought. That's how I feel. So here's the stark reality for James May, Boris, Paxman, and anyone else. Either we let God change us from within, have His Holy Spirit control our sinful natures and give us new desires and find true freedom on the way, or we become ever more controlled and restricted by increasingly tyrannical government. In other words, if we are not governed by God, then we will be ruled by tyrants.